Hey everyone and welcome back to my channel. So I'm going to be sharing my updated build that I use for open world terror rifts and elder rifts. I'm also going to be sharing free to play gem options. Let's go. Today I'm going to be sharing an updated build video for my everyday build that I use in farming, terror rifts. I do also use this in dungeons because the spam build is really hard to play on a tiny mobile screen, and I don't use a controller or anything like that. I literally just use the screen. So this build is super simple to use. It's good for players of any level, and I'm also going to share the free to play gem setup that you can use for this as well. So don't worry if you don't have all of the legendary gems that I do. I'm going to share what I would use instead of my current setup that I've got here. So let's first take a look at what this build does. So I'm just going to show you here in West March. So this is what the build looks like overall. Super fast and really easy to work with. There's barely any cooldown time on the Lightning Nova, so as soon as it's over you can pretty much reactivate it, but we have increased movement speed from some of the essences as well, and then you're doing quite a lot of damage from these three skills. So we've got Arcane Torrent, we've got Disintegrate, and also Slow Time. So let's take a look at all the essences and set items that I'm using to begin with. So for set items, I'm using 4 pieces of Grace of the Flagellant. All continual damage, channel damage, and persistent ground damage is increased by 15%. And each time you damage an individual enemy 5 times, you will do 22,708 additional damage to that enemy. Alongside this, we're using 4 pieces of Vitu's Urges. Increases the duration of all your beneficial effects on you or your party members by 30%, and increases the target's attack speed by 30% for 3 seconds each time you use a skill to grant a beneficial effect to yourself or a party member. Now when we say beneficial effects, we are talking buffs. So to check that you're using a buff skill, just head to your skill menu, and you can see at the top here, this one is damage and buff, this one is damage and buff, this one is damage and buff, and this one is also damage and buff. So make sure you're using this with the right skills. If it doesn't have buff on any of your skills on the skill menu, then it is not going to work in your setup using Vitu. So make sure that you're using that to begin with. So back to essences. Starting off with the helm, we're using Autumnal Crest. Slow time now surrounds you with a static field that follows you, damaging and applying shock to all nearby enemies. Slow time damage is increased by 18%, and damage is increased 10% from the awakened slot. We're using Sprite Spark on the chest. So for this one, Lightning Nova now transfigures you into a ball of pure lightning, allowing you to move at high speed and continually deal damage to any nearby enemies. Lightning Nova damage is increased 18% and an additional 10% from the awakened slot. On the shoulder, we're using Filtered Defense. So for this one, Disintegrate now surrounds you with an entropy field that follows you, damaging and making nearby enemies vulnerable to critical hits. Disintegrate damage is increased by 18% and an additional 10% from the awakened slot. On the pants, we're using Novel Castigation. Arcane Torrent also fires tracking missiles that seek out enemies, dealing 16,301 damage. Damage is increased by 90%, and Arcane Torrent damage is increased 10% from the awakened slot. You're going to hear me say that over and over again. Rift Carver on the main hand. Arcane Torrent now creates a chaotic orb that moves with you and fires arcane missiles at random nearby enemies. Arcane Torrent damage is increased 18%, and Arcane Torrent damage increased 10% from the awakened slot. Next, let's run on the first offhand. Lightning Nova also increases your attack and movement speed by 19% for 3 seconds. Lightning Nova cooldown is decreased by 10%. We're using Ice Spike on the alternate main hand. For this one, every 5 seconds the next magic missile becomes a frost missile, dealing 72,092 damage to all nearby enemies. Damage is increased by 90% and magic missile damage increased 10% from the awakened slot. And lastly, we're using Blaster Cast on the alternate offhand. Magic missile fires 2 additional missiles, each dealing 6,122 damage. Damage is increased by 90% and magic missile damage is increased by 10%. A couple of other things to mention while we're on the essences. We're using 2 pieces of the Detested Curse property. Create a dark void beneath you that lasts for 6 seconds when you use a skill that causes loss of control. Enemies take 24% of your damage every second they remain within the area. Effect can occur more often than once every 90 seconds. Now, I don't have any loss of control effects in this setup, but this is something that I use in my PvP setup, so I use a lot of the same gear pieces there. However, I do have a couple of other things active. So Lashed. Your primary attack now has a chance to generate 3 cracking whips that target nearby enemies and deal 24% of your damage per second over 3 seconds to any enemies they hit. Effect can occur more than once every 30 seconds. So Lashed I would highly recommend using with this build. I'm also using 3 pieces of this magic attribute for Arcane Torrent. Conjures 1 arcane bolt to orbit around you, dealing 173 damage. So I have 3 out of 4 pieces of that. So the maximum you can have is 4 pieces, and honestly, this is a really good magic attribute to actually have on your gear. I'm also using 2 pieces of this one for Lightning Nova, which increases your attack speed by 8% for 3 seconds. So that also works really nicely. Now I'm using a charm here, so this has Magic Missile and Arcane Torrent damage increase. The Magic Missile damage increase is 4% and Arcane Torrent damage increase is 2%. Looking now at my Paragon, I'm using the Brawler Paragon. Now there is a couple of things you can do to make this more powerful, and I'll go through that in a second. Basically, I'm using Brawler to increase my size slightly. So we've got heavy armor, so every enemy within 5 yards reduces the damage you take by 2%, second up to 4 times. Enemy players provide 2 stacks, so I don't use this in PvP, we're just going to be looking at this for PvE. While heavy armor is active, you can move through enemies freely, and enemies within 5 yards of you have their damage reduced by 5%. Your size and maximum life is increased by 5%. The effect of heavy armor increases from 2% to 3%. The effects of rugged increase from 5% to 8%. And Defender of Sanctuary, when you're attacked 5 or more times within 3 seconds, you gain an absorb shield equal to 15%. This comes in handy if you're doing things like terror rifts, or if you're using this build in dungeons as well, which I said I actually do that quite often. So that is the Paragon setup. Next, Warband. I'm using the attacker stance here. So with this one, damage done is increased by 3.5%. Critical hit chance is increased by 1%. I've got that buff twice, so that is 2%. Increase your damage dealt by 1% for 2 seconds every time you deal damage. This effect stacks up to 10 times, but is removed when you take damage. Increases critical hit chance by 3% while above 70% of your total life, and increases critical hit damage by 10% while your critical hit chance is greater than 70%. So we have a few things here that are working for critical hit chance. I'm going to just look at my stats at this point. So as we mentioned, critical hit chance. My critical hit chance just from my actual gear is 31%. So this doesn't include critical hit chance coming from my other areas. So this doesn't include it from my gems like Roiling Consequence. And a few people asked to see my stats as well. So let me show you that now if I can click on the right thing. So my armor is 5,493. Armor penetration is 5,493. Potency is 5,384. And resistance is 4,342. So what I would focus on, if you're looking at your reforges on your gear, definitely go for critical hit chance. That helps a lot in this build. And also attack speed is nice to have, especially for your skills and primary attack. So that is that part of the setup. We're going to talk legendary gems in a moment. Firstly, let's take a look at how this looks in the training ground, and also how you can give it more damage if you want less movement speed. So we are going to conduct a 30-second test here to see what damage we get from this build. I'm going to stand pretty close because the essence that we're using on Lightning Nova is Sprite Spark, and that doesn't actually damage your enemies unless you are basically right against them. So we're going to stand in this position here to test this out. I'm then also going to change my Paragon to show you how you can get more damage if you don't mind sacrificing a bit of movement speed. So let's start with this 30-second test here. And you can see initially you get a really nice hit of damage from this setup. That is also coming from my legendary gems, which I will go through in a moment. As I said, I'm going to show you free-to-play options for legendary gems as well, because this build does work really nicely whether you're free-to-play or whether you do pay into the game as well. So I obviously have spent on the game, and there's things that I buy monthly like Boon of Plenty and Battle Pass, as well as the occasional bundle if I'm feeling lucky. And I use that obviously mainly for the Elder Rift runs. So in 30 seconds, we have 128 million damage, because I'm removing the fact that we're on 31 seconds here. And let's look at the breakdown. This is where the damage is coming from. So we've got the majority of the damage is coming from Magic Missile. Then we've got the Disintegrate, and then Arcane Torrent. So that is where the damage is from. And we got 21.3 million damage from my legendary gem setup as well. Now, if you wanted to give this build even more damage, so this is what I would potentially recommend if you're slightly below the recommended combat rating and you're looking for more damage. I'd go for the Slinger Tree, and I'd go for these notes. So we're going for the notes all on the left. Now we have Bloodthirst. Using a skill while in combat increases the damage dealt by 2 monsters by 1% for 10 seconds. Stacks up to 5 times, but all stacks are removed when you take damage. Damage is increased by 2%. When Bloodthirst and Fury are removed from taking damage, you discharge lightning, damaging up to 5 targets within 5 yards. So Fury, using a skill while in combat, increases your critical hit chance by 1% for 10 seconds. Fury stacks up to 5 times, but all stacks are removed when you take damage. So that's going to give you more critical hit chance, which obviously you want that for the Warband buff as well to get the most benefit from that. And superiority, Bloodthirst and Fury now stack up to 10 times. So that is the additional or alternate setup you can use for Paragon. And this is going to deal more damage. So I'm going to show you this now. Let's reset this and do another 30-second burst so that you can see. And I'm using the attack stance as well on my actual stance at the bottom right corner, as you can see. But this setup works really nicely. As I said, I normally go for this with the dungeons. You could use a different warband buff, but I found when you use the protector buff, it actually gives you a lot less damage. So that is why I'm going for the attacker buff here instead. So we'll just carry on for 30 seconds. And in 30 seconds, we've got 140 million damage. So yeah, an increase in damage there. Damage per second is slightly higher by about 500,000 per second. And when you look at the breakdown, the legendary gems is slightly higher as well. But you can see there's more damage actually coming from Disintegrate and Magic Missile there as well. So that is what the damage looks like for this build. We'll also test this in an Elder Rift so that you can see what it looks like. I'm going to swap back to the Brawler Paragon. And I'm going to show you how quickly you can run through an Elder Rift with this build. So this is super fun to play with, really easy. You basically just walk through mobs, and it is the same in the, oh my gosh, what's it called? Terror Rifts. You basically just walk through mobs with this build. I'm going to swap. I'm not doing that stupid layout for an Elder Rift. That will take like a whole minute to complete, and I'm not doing that crappy map. Let's hope we get a better one this time. Let's try again and see. Please give me a non-shit map. Okay, this is much better. So activate all the skills, and you can see you can literally just walk through the monsters. Super easy. And yes, I'm higher resonance. I'm at 5,000 resonance, or just below 5,000 resonance with this setup actually, because I did swap out some of my gems for lower ranked gems. But I just wanted to show you what this looks like on my character as is. And I'm going to recommend gems that you can use if you are free to play, because I know that not everyone wants to spend on this game, which is totally acceptable if you don't want to do that. Let's head to kill this boss, and you can see also, as well as my phone battery dying, it's very quick to take down bosses there. So now let's take a look at the legendary gems that I'm using in this build. So this is going to be my personal legendary gems, and then I'm going to show you what gem setup I would use alternatively to my one. So you can see I'm 4,971 resonance with this build. I'm using Blood-Soaked Jade. I'm using Starfire Shard, Roiling Consequence, Pain Clasp, which is the only 2-star gem in the setup that I've got, Void Spark, Bottle's Hope, Wolfjort, and Colossus Engine. Now I did originally have Seeping Bile in this setup, which I swapped Colossus Engine for. I would potentially swap in Viper's Bite, but we're going to discuss this in a little bit more detail in a second. But this is the gem setup that I'm using for this build. Obviously, if you're using a Burn, Bleed or Poison effect, this will make the build even stronger because you're using Grace of the Flagellant set for the set items. But that is my gem setup. I've kind of given you a little bit of time on each gem. If you want to read the description for each gem, you can pause the video and screenshot that, but I'm not going to go and read through the descriptions. I just wanted to tell you top line what I'm using for this. So let's now take a look at the market, and I can recommend some other gems if you're free to play. So firstly, I'm going to start off with the 2-star gems that I would say are essential in this build if you are free to play or a low spender. And those are Viper's Bite, Pain Clasp, and Mother's Lament. So starting off, I'm not going to read through the descriptions, I'm just going to leave them on the screen. But if you're using Viper's Bite, this goes hand in hand with Pain Clasp. If you want to see the description of the gem, obviously just screenshot it so that you have that to hand. So yeah, Viper's Bite and Pain Clasp are a must-have alongside Mother's Lament. These three all work beautifully in this build. I did have them in my setup originally before I started finding 5-star gems I wanted to use. So I would highly recommend you go for those ones. There's also the new Spectre Glass, so that could work really nicely in this, as this is for critical hit as well. And as you're going to have a high critical hit chance from the Reforges and also from having gems like Mother's Lament and using the Attacker Warband buff, this would work really nicely in this setup. So those are 4 gems so far that I would recommend. There are others here that you could use, however I would say those are the most beneficial for this setup. Bloody Reach is also really nice, but because we're going to be quite close range with the Lightning Nova Essence, this doesn't necessarily work as well as it would with the more ranged builds that you can use. Power and Command is another option if you don't mind going for another 2-star gem. So this one is again a gem that I've used previously in my setups and works beautifully. So looking at 1-star gems, Entropic Well I would say is another must-have. This is going to increase your skill damage. And then looking at some of the others, Lowe's Focus Gaze, this is an option. This is for your charge skills. Blessed Pebble is a really nice one. This increases the duration of your beneficial effects, and obviously with this build all of your skills are beneficial effects, all of them are buffs, so Blessed Pebble is a really good option for this setup. Next up, Berserker's Eye. This increases the damage you deal. It does also increase the damage you take, but again, this is a gem that I had in my setup when I was still completely free to play, and it works beautifully in any of the builds because it is just going to increase your damage. Another one that I would say is Carson's Invigoration. So this is going to increase your primary attack's speed. So that again works really nicely in this build because when you're attacking bosses, you're going to be needing to use your primary attack as well as your skills. Obviously in Elder Rifts and in Terror Rifts, you should just be able to charge through the mobs with this setup, especially if you're using Viper's Bite. That will get you the kill eventually if you're using a lower resonance player or a lower resonance character with this setup. So those are the gems that I would go for. There are other options that you could choose, but those I would say would be my top picks if you are free to play in this game. So that is it from me today for this video. I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. Obviously, this is just an updated version of my previous build, and I know some of you are probably thinking, well, why have you swapped out Magic Missile for, or why have you swapped out Electrocute for the Magic Missile? So I did swap my primary attack from my previous build when I shared this last, and it's just because I have that increased damage from my charm. I'm finding that Magic Missile is giving me better damage, but also Magic Missile has a lot more range to it, so you can totally use this with Electrocute, but if you want to still keep your range and keep your distance at times, then going for Magic Missile is the better option out of the two. So I hope you've enjoyed this and found it helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.
Official Diablo partner.